Okay, so now not everyone's back yet, but so you guys know now the class is going to get a little bit faster. So don't be bashful if you need us to stop and re-explain things and stuff like that. Also, if you're sitting in the spot where you previously sat, stand up and move. I'm totally serious. I'm totally serious. So if you're sitting, it's okay. You can unplug. If you're sitting in a, also if you're sitting in the same row as to where you sat, move. Nope. Don't sit in the same row. Change rows. Nope. Nope. Change rows. Change it up. That's okay. It'll be real fast. Just sit like right over there, and then you don't have to do anything. What? Your USB key? I'll ask. I'll make sure you get it. Sean. Who's Sean, right?
Sean.
Okay.
We've met a few times. I'm not sure. First time I saw you was actually at GA when Justin.
Oh, cool.
asked you to speak.
Yeah. Were you in that class?
Yeah.
Cool.
It was in Justin's class.
Cool.
And then I think I saw you at a meetup too.
I'm around. I try to speak a lot, so I try to get out, get my face seen.
You're in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you?
I am, yeah.
Cool.
I saw you at the Millsoft.
Cool.
That was a great presentation, by the way. Like,
Thanks.
either mobile.
Which one was it? Oh, mobile?
Yeah.
Cool.
Doing mobile at software.
Yeah.
Were you doing any interviews?
I tried to speak a lot, so yes, maybe.
I'd love to go to the presentation. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to one in Toronto in a few weeks, one in China in a few weeks, maybe one in Europe in a few weeks, a few months. Yeah. I don't know if I'm, no.
Hi, how you doing? You called for the air conditioning, so it's too cold.
Yeah.
You guys want to turn it all the way? If you turn it all the way up, it's going to heat up pretty quick in here. You want me to lower it first?
Can you lower it? Yeah.
All the way down.
Awesome, thanks. What's your name? Eddie. Thanks, Eddie. What?
Psychological test of some sort.
It is. Actually, I'm trying to make you guys as crazy as possible. And then by the end of this, we'll be dancing in our underwear, drinking Jello through straws, and calling Ari is awesome over and over and over. Oh, yeah. Okay, doesn't that feel better? Like totally changing it up, giving your brains like a refresh. All right. Okay, so news from Eddie, the guy who's going to change the air conditioning. He's going to lower it. And then if we're still too cold, then we can ask him to totally turn it off. But he said he wants to lower the air conditioning, not lower the temperature. You guys are all like, that's not what I asked for. Okay. All right. Was lunch good? Lunch felt good for me. Good for you? Okay. Right. So we left off with this in our HTML with our input field, and with a function that gets called when we submit this form. And then we have this method getting called, this HTTP method. Now, can I have a volunteer? Just someone raise their hand. Cool. I forgot your name. I'm sorry.
Fred.
Fred. I don't think I got your name, Fred. Oh. Now I better not forget it. Okay. So HTTP returns a promise, right?
That's what you told us.
Well, unless I was lying, which I wasn't lying, HTTP returns a promise. So how can we get data when HTTP comes back? We want to set something up.
Oh yeah, it's this dot then
Yep.
something.
Yep. So we'll call the .then method on this function, and we'll pass it in a function. Excuse me. The .then method, when you call it on an HTTP object, will get a data object, and that data object will be a bunch of data. Let's go look at that data real quick. All I'm doing right now is I'm console logging that data out. By the way, we are playing a little bit with fire in the sense that this internet is so slow that hopefully these responses will get back to us. If not, don't worry, we'll set up a way to catch these errors as well. So if we refresh the page, remember we set San Francisco as the city when we boot our page. Click go. Hooray! Hey, look, it actually worked this time. So let's go ahead and look at that object. So the HTTP object wraps up everything that we sent into that HTTP method as a config. You can see here we have our method that comes in as a config. We have the URL that we pass in, just like that. It also responds to us with a status. That status is the status code that comes back to us from the foreign server. And the thing that we're most interested in is this data object. This data object is the object that comes back in from our HTTP request. Excuse me. So we're not actually interested in this data that comes back from the object. We're interested in the data. Data.data object. The data.data object, it sounds a little bit verbose, is the object that comes back in. So if we come back here, refresh the page, we'll see that this is the actual object that comes back from the request, that comes back from the open weather map request. Okay. Before we look at that object, though, I want to peek a little bit peek into our JSON-P request. So when we make our request, in our request inside of here, we're setting the method as JSON-P. Notice, so the way that JSON-P works, as I mentioned before, is when the response comes back, if the server supports JSON-P, it will wrap it in a callback. Inside of our actual URL that we're requesting, we have this callback that's called JSON_callback, all caps. This is important. This won't, if you don't pass in your request with this specific string, your JSON-P request will not work. The reason is because, actually let's call back. Let's let's go look at it first with it not working. So we'll pass in my callback just like that, okay? By the way, if you have a JSON P server on the other end, depending on the backend server, most will call it callback like that. Most will call the key callback. If it doesn't, look at the docs. Reddit, for instance, does not. It calls it CB. So you may have to pass in CB like that. But OpenWeatherMap uses callback. That being said, let's go refresh our page and make this request. We can go look at this request, and you'll see that what happens is that request is responded to. I wonder if we can open this in a new tab. Yes, so that request is wrapped in the callback called myCallback. So JSONP, what it does is it says, if the server supports it, it will wrap in whatever you pass in as the callback as that method, right? Is there any confusion on that? Okay, this is important because what Angular does, rather than pass in, go this way. So rather than pass in my callback, which is for, in all intents and purposes, it's undefined. We're not defining that unless we define it on the window object. The way that Angular handles this, if you pass in JSON underscore callback all caps, just like that, Angular will create an anonymous method, an anonymous function for us for the duration of this HTTP request, and it will create that funny looking method there. We don't have to deal with that. Angular will take care of doing that for us. We just have to make sure that we pass in the exact string that Angular is looking for, JSON underscore callback all caps. Make sense? As a quick aside, the way that JSONP works is, it should be pretty obvious, is when our JavaScript gets back this method, our JavaScript is going to call whatever that method is called back in with that JSON as an argument, like that. Huzzah, it works. Okay. Okay, cool. So now we have this object, and this object is what we get directly back from our weather service. The weather service passes us back a city object. That city object has latitude and longitude coordinates. That's likely the center of San Francisco. It passes back the country. We don't need to deal with the ID. It also passes back the name. And it says that there's 0 population in San Francisco, but that is blatantly wrong, because I live here. That's at least 1. Okay. It also passes back a list, and this list is an array of, in 10-minute intervals, I believe. It's an array of the temperature, the humidity, the degrees, the weather, all that fun stuff, the airspeed. The reason it only passes back 1 is because in our request object, we are saying that we only want 1 count. If we want, if we want 10, we can refresh that, and we can go, and this will give us back a list of 10 in 10-minute intervals, starting with the soonest first back. Okay, that makes sense, right? Okay. We're only interested in 1. We're only interested in whatever the temperature is right now. So we're only going to ask for 1 back. One thing to note is that right now, the way that this is set up is that it can be kind of painful to customize this. Like it can be kind of painful if you want to say, okay, well, if you want metric units, you can get metric units. Then we have to go in and parse that string and make a new weather URL. Angular allows us to pass parameters in a param object, which makes it a little bit nicer. So we can say this just like that. We can say, okay, our queue is going to be our scope.city, so we can remove it from here. And our callback is going to be JSON callback, just like that. And then we can remove these two. Just sometimes it's a little bit nicer. I think it's called params. It might be called param. Oh, bless you. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that it was called params. Basically what I'm doing, right now the URL is hard-coded was hard-coded with JSON callback as a parameter, as a request parameter. We don't have to do that in the URL. We can do that in the request, just like this. This is good for things like, let's say that we wanted the user to be able to say, no, I want a list of 10 requests back, rather than having to muck with the URL string. We can do that in a params object. We can make it easier to customize the request URL. Okay. Okay, Lady in Red. Well, that's a good song. What's your name? Bonnie. Okay. Knowing what you know now about Angular, how can we get this weather data into our view? There's two things we have to do.
Well, we need the Yelp.
Oh, we'll do Yelp. We'll do Yelp in a minute. Let's only worry about
The
weather for the time being.
weather. So, okay, we have the data.
Yep. So we have the data coming back.
So we need to pass it to the view.
Yep. How do we do that?
So let's see, we're in the controller.
I'll give you a hint.
So we need, oh yeah, well, so scope.
Anybody want to help? Do you want help?
You gotta,
Create variables on scope for the different data you want to display in your view.
Yeah. Tell Bonnie. Don't tell me.
Going to create variables on scope that then you display in your view. Okay, so fetch data, would that be the property that we would access in our view?
So that's a function that we'll call from the view. Here, I'll help you out. So basically what we want to do is we want to set a property in the response, in our when our data comes back, when our promise comes back, we want to set a property on the scope to the data that we're interested in the view. So we can do, in this case, I'm just going to call it weather. Just kidding, call it weather. Just like that. And we'll just set weather equals to data.data. Just like that.
So we can just do the double curly braces weather.
Exactly. So one thing that I do when I'm writing code, when I'm writing view code, is I will put a pre-tag in there, and I'll add a pipe. You'll see we'll talk about what that is in a few minutes. I'll add a pipe, and on the other side of that pipe, I'll add the keyword JSON, just like that. So don't worry about what that means quite yet. As I said, we'll talk about that shortly. However, what this gives us is when we come back and we refresh our page and we click on Go, it's making that request very slowly. It's making that request as it does. Let's try it again. It'll make that request, and it'll populate the pre-tag with the JSON data in a pretty printed form. That's what the pipe JSON does. Cool. Make sense? Oh yeah, we'll move back to it.
You just
Right.
go back to the HTML.
Yes. We'll go back to the app in just a second. Is that what you're talking about? Cool. So from a production standpoint, we don't use the JSON very much. We don't use this. It's called a filter. We won't use this very much. It's really good for debugging when you're writing code. When you're writing in the code, and you're like, oh, how is it given to me? Oh, and then you type things. It's the type things. Okay. You have a question. I know you do. Oh, you're just really enjoying me typing?
What's the difference between the ng bind and ng model? Like when you're doing like the braces?
Right. You mean this guy right here, the template binding?
Yeah. Why would we use like ng
Bind instead? I will answer that shortly. I'll answer that after we finish this section and then before we move on to the next one. Okay, so now we see all the code that we get back We see all the JSON that we get back inside this nice little pre-tag, right? Does everyone have that? Is it not working for anybody?
Where declared the weather?
Oh, right. I declared that here in the then function. Okay, so if an error happens inside of this, who have I not talked to yet? The guy in the blue sweatshirt. Yeah. Is that a Hilfiger sweatshirt? Hilfiger? Hollister? Okay. All right. Do you remember from the Promise API how we catch errors? Yep. And then we'll in this case, we're not actually going to put anything on there yet. Error in weather fetch. Just in case when something happens, we can view that. If we did want to catch an error and display that to the user, how would we do that? What was your name? Navin. Cool name. How would we do that, Navin?
We'll receive there in the ERR.
Yep. So if we wanted to display it to the user, how would we do that?
Just add a variable to the scope.
Okay. We would do something like,
ERR.
yeah. This will also pass back the full data, so we can, actually it depends on what the error is. We'll just put it as that for now. Yeah, we have one right here. Okay. Oh, you're asking on the HTTP object? Right. I'm not going to cover that. The reason is, so what he's asking, what was your name? Arkady, that's right. I'm sorry. So the HTTP object itself has some helper methods, and those helper methods are success, like this. Right? So this is the HTTP promise gives two extra methods, one called .success and one called .error. And what these two methods do is rather than calling .data.data, this success method will call back specifically data.data, but you don't have to call it data.data. It just passes the data of the response back. Similarly, the error does the exact same thing. This also does, if you wanted the status code just like that, it gives you the status code in argument form. I don't use this syntax in production. I use the .then. This is up to you if you want to use it. I don't cover this because I don't use it. So if you don't like typing data.data, then use success and error. That's the difference. I think this is more explicit. Okay.
And does it give you the errors, or does it?
It does, yeah. You can call, if you call success and error, just like that. The HTTP object is the only object that adds these special helpers on it. That's one reason I don't use it, is because you have to know about the special helpers, and if you're trying to pass back to another user, another developer who doesn't know about that, you're going to confuse them, which is why I just use the simple promise API. In fact, those are simply wrappers. Those success and error methods are simply wrappers around the promise API anyway. And in your own code, you can write those wrappers pretty succinctly, which is what I do. So using promise chains. So either way, you can use either one. One more aside to that, one of the reasons I like that is because all the data that I want is available in that single object, as opposed to having to know the order of the parameters as they come back. So I hope that helps. Okay. You guys ready to move on? No? What's going on? Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, so now what we want to, now we probably don't want to show, not we probably don't, we don't want to show the JSON that comes back to our user, right? We just want to show a compiled version of it, right? We want to say the weather in San Francisco is going to be X, because that's a lot nicer than the weather in San Francisco is going to be JSON. All right, so if we look inside of our JSON, we can see that we have this list, and this list represents, as I mentioned before, a list of the n number of weather readings for the past 10 minutes in 10-minute increments. I believe it's 10 minutes. It could be 1 hour. It could be 60 minutes. However, for our purposes, we only want the first one, so it doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure it's 10 minutes. You can look on openweathermap.org if you're really interested. In fact, somebody should do that. Anyway, so probably what we want to do is we want to show this data in a nice form. Yeah, I just said that like 4 times. So the way that we can do that is we can simply bind this. We can simply bind this to the view using something like the weather in, and we can, the weather in city is, and we can do this a couple different ways. And the first one we'll do is the weather in the city is weather.list.first temp dot day. Oh, do you guys notice I was flipping back and forth quite a bit? The reason I was flipping back and forth is because I'm looking at this JSON. This is just how I do it. You could say that's like professional, but it's probably not. I'm not really that professional. So, my T-shirt, and I don't have a tie on. I have sneakers. Okay. So the way that I do it is I look at that JSON and then I'll parse what I want out of that JSON. Right? It's pretty obvious. I don't really need to explain that, but that's why I was flipping back and forth quite a bit. So, sorry, I also flipped away from that. Yes.
Sometimes I'll throw just a debugger, like a breakpoint side of it then.
Yep.
Then get the nice cron dev tools to.
You can definitely do that too. Yep. We're not going to cover debugger today, but it's a good idea. I like it too.
It's one of my favorite tools.
It's pretty nice. Okay. I'm going to come over here and refresh the page, and we'll see that right now, this says the weather in San Francisco is blank, right? It says nothing inside of there. Do you get it? Nope. Okay. It says the weather in is blank right now. We probably don't want that, but we'll come back to that in 1 sec after we make the HTTP request. So if we say go, and the internet cooperates with us, the internet is not cooperative. There we go. We'll see that we have the weather from our weather list populating right there. Hooray. 62.49 degrees. It is actually kind of cold outside. Also, just because it's kind of fun, let's also say, hey, the sky's clear, because the weather, openweathermap.org gives us that. So we can do that by somebody else walk me through this. James, we haven't talked yet. I mean, we talked at lunch, but we didn't talk here. Okay. It's okay. We just want to output the sky is clear. So how would we do that in here, in our view?
You would add a new HTML1 of those curly tags.
I'll give you a hint. Not quite. Oh wait, I'm right. I lied. That's right. Ha ha ha.
I think it was
Dot weather dot description. So if we come here and we refresh the page, notice that this is still here. This, even though there's no weather in there, we press enter. Theoretically, the internet cooperates with us, and we get back a response. Wishful thinking. Hooray! There it is. Did I not save it? I may not have saved it. I spelled description wrong?
Weather's an array. Weather's an array.
Aha, so it is.
So it needs to be 0.
My bad. All right, let's try that again. Hooray, the sky's clear. Huzzah! Okay. Okay, so when we refresh this page and we have no data in here, it's not very pretty because we just have this like empty thing hanging out, right? I see some nodding heads. I see one nodding head. So, knowing what you know about Angular, lady in the back row using a PC. What's your name? Yeah, you. Sharon? Knowing what you know about Angular, Sharon, how can we hide this if there's no data? Yep, and what is that called? It starts with a D. Right, and what? Yes, and what is that called? What is ng show and ng hide? What are they called? Starts with a D. Close. Yeah, it's a directive, and a directive is that. You guys can help her out. A directive is. Yeah. So tell Sharon, so she can answer that. Wait, somebody tell Sharon what you just said. A directive is? That runs on an element that a directive is a function that runs on an element to augment its functionality. That augments its functionality. Cool, so we can use ng show and ng hide, right? So if we want to hide this, if we only want to show this, the weather is, if we only want to show this when the temperature or the weather has come back, what do we want to bind our Angular, what do we want to pass in as our Angular expression to ng show? If we only want to show it when the weather is there, yeah. The reason this works is because weather initially is undefined. When that request comes back, it will be defined. Undefined, remember, is falsy. Defined is truthy. Something defined will be truthy. So this will only show, this div will only show if that weather is populated. So if we come here and we refresh the page, you'll see it's no longer there's nothing on the page because we're hiding it. We click go, the internet responds. When we get back a request and or we get back a response, and you can see that now that automatically shows up on the view. Notice we didn't do any polling. We didn't set up any requests. We didn't set up any requests to check on the request. Didn't set up any monitors to check on the requests. It just works. This is why promises are awesome inside of Angular. All we did was deal with the data that we want to populate on the view, and Angular took care of the rest. Hooray! What? Yo! Hooray! We can, oh yeah. Ooh. Well, at least half of you are listening. Okay. Huzzah. All right, so the question was asked, why do we use the template binding tags versus why do we use ngbind? The reason we use the reason why we use these ng template tags is if I'm going to briefly mention how Angular works. If we have time, I will dive deeper into more descriptions of how this actually works if we have time when we get to custom directives. If we don't have time, I urge that you either check out the book that has everything that you need to know about Angular, or read the docs on how the digest loop works. I'm going to describe the digest loop really quickly. So the way that a browser works is a browser will get a bunch of HTML, and as it receives that HTML, it will start parsing that HTML. If it sees a tag that makes a request, like a script tag or a CSS tag or a link or a CSS or a script, or even if you're using, I forgot what the HTML tag is that includes. It's like, I think it's just include. That doesn't matter. No one uses it anyway. When it sees those tags, it will make a request to get those things, and it will just continue parsing. So when it sees an h1 tag, it's going to say, oh, cool, I have an h1 method, so it's going to call that h1 method and lay that thing out. The reason why I say this is because if you have a lot of things, if you have a big list of things that the browser needs to load, it could take a long time for the page to load. During that time, the page is going to look like it's going to have these squiggly brackets in there. So we can mimic this if we, let's just take out angular.min for a second, refresh the page, you'll see that we have these brackets in there, right? Can you guys see all that? We have these ugly looking brackets in there, and our users will see this. We'll see these brackets. There's ways that we can get around this using a directive called ngcloak, and ngcloak is really nice. It still shows a blank screen. For the time being, we're not going to deal with ngcloak. We're not going to deal with ngcloak right now. So the way that we can get around this is rather than using these squiggly brackets, we can use something called ngbind. ngbind is an alternative to using those brackets like this. So notice right here we have the weather in city is. If we use ngbind, we're no longer seeing that the weather in city is. We're seeing a span with an empty element. That's why you'd use ngbind. There's other things you can do if you want to display HTML. Let's say your server is rendering HTML and you want to display that HTML. You'd use ngbind HTML. Use ngbind HTML like that, and that would load up HTML instead. As opposed to, you can't, due to security reasons, Angular won't allow you to pass in HTML. Do you guys get it?
Yeah.
Huzzah, what was it?
I'll tell you.
Okay. That's why you'd use that otherwise. All right, let's put Angular back in there so it works. Huzzah. Okay. Does that satisfy your answer or your question? Rad. Okay, cool. So now we have the weather. Wow, that was super fast this time. So now we have the weather. Oh, it's getting warmer in here. I mean, in San Francisco. Also in here. You can use either one, whichever one you like. I like the curly brackets. Okay, I'll talk about ngcloak real quick. So ngcloak is a directive that will add a class called cloak or ngcloak on it. That ngcloak class has a style of display none. ngcloak like that. Just to be, this is, oh, by the way, if you're using an attribute and you're trying to support IE8, pass it in an empty attribute like that. If there's no attributes, IE8 will support that. Also, it's a good habit to get into using that for IE8 support. However, if you're developing for IE8, convince your clients it's wrong. Okay. What? ngcloak will add a cloak class to it, and when Angular, the app is ready to bootstrap, it will remove that. So ngcloak will effectively prevent those squiggly brackets. So if you like the squiggly brackets, I like the squiggly brackets, the mustache brackets, the smiley face brackets. you can use ngcloak to manipulate that for you. Make sense? So it's a
But Angular must be loaded at the time it will process
Yep.
ngcloak. So if it's loaded, we would anyway not see the curly brackets. So it's
So
not very useful. Not
it
getting the point.
It can be. For one, if you add a style, if you fake ngcloak, this is what we do in one of our apps. If you fake ngcloak and say display none, and then when ngcloak is removed, then you can have it. Then you can custom define that. Alternatively, you can load Angular before ngcloak. You can load Angular in your head.
But then you can keep the brackets because Angular will process it.
Yep. I like the brackets. Sometimes you have to use ngbind. Like I said, if you want HTML to render, then you need to use ngbind because the squiggly brackets won't show HTML. They'll show plain text. Well, they'll show the text of HTML, which would be kind of weird for users.
I do like a triple brackets, kind of like handlebars, and it renders HTML.
No. This isn't handlebars. It's not mustache. Yeah. Okay, sweet. So now we have our weather coming back in, right? Now we probably want to go get some Yelp data. Hooray! Oh, come on, internet. All right, so let's go hopefully get some Yelp data. All right, so on our scope, let's create a new method, and this method will be called get Yelp data. Hooray. Okay, so inside of our scope, also, we're going to have to go grab this URL. This URL is right here. That, by the way, if you forgot, is in the url.js file. So just grab that, copy it, put it over here. And I don't remember my Yelp key. Just kidding, I don't have it memorized. Let me just go grab my Yelp key real quick. Oh, I deleted it. Well, that's sad. Huzzah. Okay. All I did was just go grab my Yelp key. That's it. Didn't do anything tricky. We're using version 1. Okay, so Yelp, currently Yelp version 1 does not support cores. I haven't used version 2, so how do we get around that? What? Yeah, what's your name? Blake?
Yeah, Blake, yeah.
Hi, Blake. Okay, cool, so we have to use JSONP, as we already previously did. Huzzah. So using JSONP, Blake, can you walk me through how we would create this?
So we grab our get roller. Basically, we grab a get Yelp function. We go and grab our get weather function, basically copy and paste it.
Okay.
We use the Yelp URL instead of the weather URL, and then we have to figure out what information we need to pass to Yelp to actually get the review for the restaurant or whatever we want.
Right.
So probably check out the rural business review search. And so we find out from the Yelp REST service basically what we need to pass in for a restaurant name or restaurant city, and then make sure we pass those in the request.
Right. Wow, you answered like way more than I was expecting you to, and that was awesome, Blake. If I had stars and stuff that meant anything, I would give them to you. Okay, I just forgot. Okay, sorry, I just forgot to pass that guy in. Okay, so almost exactly what Blake said. We're going to be using the business review search using the V1 API. I happen to know that we can just pretty much copy and paste the weather to do that. The one thing that we need to do is we need to tell Yelp what our Yelp key is, and the way we do that is by passing in the WYSID, which I suppose stands for Yelp Web Service Identifier. That was a total guess. Let's call this nearby. Okay. Does everyone copy and paste the weather and then change everything inside of it? Which begs the question, well, why did you copy and paste if you're going to change everything? It's really just me saying change everything when it's not really what we're doing. That's why. Okay. All right, cool. So when we press enter, when we press enter on the page, not only do we want to go get the weather, we also want to get the Yelp data inside of there. So currently, we've defined this weather function as fetch data. That's not entirely accurate as to what we're doing here. So what we're going to do, instead of that, is we're going to create a new function called get weather data. Just like that. The reason we're going to do this will become clear later, however. But now in order to get weather data, scope.get Yelp data. So now when we press enter, now we're going to call two functions instead of just one. And if we have time, I'll dive into the queue all. I don't think we'll have time, though, not to get through everything. Okay, so I'm going to come back down here real quick. So now we have this data coming back in from Yelp, and we're setting it to nearby, right? Is this going to show up in the view?
No,
Why not?
not down yet.
Yeah, we haven't bound it. I like your style. I forgot your name already.
Fred.
Fred. Okay, so we need to bound it. So it says Fred. So, let's do that. All right. Let's also move this guy over. Oh, wait, we needed that other div. All right, so we probably want this in its own little column. And let's set that JSON to come back when that data comes back. Sound good, guys? And gals, ladies, gentlemen, people? That's better, people. Okay, so if we go and we press refresh, now we're going to send off 2 requests instead of just 1 when we press enter or click the go button. Oh, we did not specify location. I think that's because we forgot to specify location. Okay, this is right. It's not cube, it's location. Sorry, change that from queue to location. Okay, now let's refresh the page. And Yelp is taking a long time. Hooray! Okay, if your page looks like this, don't raise your hand. If it does look like this, wait, the other way around. Is everyone at this stage with your app? Okay. In this case, I'm going to walk around and help. Okay, if it's not, yeah, totally. All we did was we just bound nearby with JSON. That's it. Okay. Is it the same? Okay.
So I made two functions, get
Yep.
web data, get web data, and then calling it from here like
Yep.
you have it.
That's right.
I'm behind on HTML still, but I'm still getting this though.
All right. What's that? Line 14. Oh, you need a squiggly bracket at the end of that function. Yeah, but there we go. And then let's press go and see what happens. Undefined is not a function. And where is that? What line is it? Line 8. Get weather date. Cool. Undefined is not line 8. Scope dot weather data get. Is it spelled right? Did you save this?
Yeah.
Line 8. Can you double click on get weather data right there on line 8? Oh, it's not actually defined. Do you see the difference?
Oh, the capital.
Yep. There we go.
Okay. I just need so this is good. I just need on the HTML. So I was doing the catch up at that point. So can you just help me write one of those things? How to show the JSON like
Yep.
the way?
Type pre.
Like reduce. Okay.
Just pre. Hit tab. Not. Oh yeah, I guess that works. And then squiggly bracket. Weather. Pipe. This. JSON. And then squiggly brackets. Yep.
And I can do the same thing for Yelp.
Yep.
Let me see if that works.
You have to make sure that it says. Wait, can you go back real quick? What did?
You in a browser?
Yeah. What did message say? Can you just click on that object? Yeah. And click on message. Missing. Oh yeah. You need to add. If we go back to here, that's what I added right there. See line 43.
This is for the Yelp, right? Okay.
All right. Just make sure it matches that. It should work. Is it working? Awesome. Working?
Mine's just not, I don't know, doing the parsing for the JSON. Right?
No, that's good.
Is
That's
right?
that's exactly right. Yeah, that's where we are. Working?
No, not working for me. Oh, okay, I was like,
Come in.
should all that I'm using your Yelp key?
Shouldn't be, but you can tell if you load in the browser. Look at, refresh, and then click on go. There looks like there's an error. Scroll up. No, in the console. Undefined is not a function. So go look at app.js, line 11. so you need to define that as a function. Note it in there, I wrapped that in a function.
Scope. Oh, okay. This
Yeah.
needs to be wrapped in the GitWeb.
Yep. Cool. Yeah.
I was getting the same error. Undefined is not a function.
Line 12.
Yeah.
What's line 12? Oh yeah, you called it
Oh,
fetch
fetch
weather.
whoops,
Yep.
okay.
Working?
Yeah.
Nice. Got it?
Yes.
Sweet. Working? Yep. Okay, if it's not working, raise your hand. Sweet, almost there. What's up?
Oh, I've got typos in here somewhere, I think.
Go to the browser. All right, what does that say? Undefined is not a function? Oh, wait, it's okay. Look at app line 14. We can,
Right there, it's just right here.
so get weather data.
Get weather date. Oh,
So we had someone else do that too.
there you go.
Cool.
Okay, let's see that. It's probably not the last one.
All right, is everyone working? Nope. A few more. Okay. Yes. What?
What location?
Oh yeah. Let's go see your code. Needs to pass in location scope.city. Can we see your page again? Yeah. San Francisco. Change that to some other city just in case. Right. Change it to Phoenix, Arizona. There's only one Phoenix, Arizona. And we're going to do that city just slightly differently also. AZ. Yeah. Multiple locations, that's weird. Can we go see your code one time real quick? Can we go see your code? Yeah.
Is this URL correct? Maybe it's not.
Yeah, that looks right.
Maybe you have a typo here.
That should be right. Right. I don't actually know why that's happening over there.
Yeah. You know what's in the record that you like
What?
put San Francisco. Sometimes it works. Same error, but if I do this.
Oh, it's probably encoding it funny. It's okay. We're going to actually change how that works based on the weather API. So is it working for you guys?
No, I get the same. It's like it's passing the data, so the response that I get is just this, and it just says unspecified location.
Can we go look at your code real quick?
Yeah.
We need to pass in a, yeah, it's not queue, it's location. Okay. Yep. I can.
Is the yolk supposed to work without the key?
No. Oh. Okay. So some of you are getting like location not found or multiple matches not working, stuff like that. If you are getting one of those, if you're getting the location not found part, that's likely because, what? Oh, thought someone said. It's likely because your user, we probably want to pass in something kind of nice. We want to allow the user to type in things and we're not going to implement a type ahead today. However, if we were, it would take care of this. We probably want to do is we want to probably search for that city first and then call Yelp based on whatever city that Yelp is coming back with. I believe Yelp, does Yelp allow us to do Latin long? Yes. Okay. So the Yelp API, or the weather API comes back with a latitude and longitude, and that's more accurate than a city name. So what we're going to do instead of passing in scope.city like this, right there, is we're going to depend upon the weather URL coming back first, and that weather URL coming back with a latitude and longitude, and then we're going to use that latitude and longitude to make the Yelp API request. We can do this using promise chains. However, we won't do that yet. We're going to get there. Remind me to do that, because maybe I'll forget. Okay, because I want to do something first. Right, so if it is working, if it's not working, just stick with me before we get to there. We're going to do some filtering right now, because filtering is fun. So if it is working, you should see that the response from Yelp comes back with a bunch of businesses, right? So these businesses have rating image URL, they have cities, they have review count, they have review average rating, wherever that is. Categories, they have photos, they have names, because we want to use names, of course, because it's kind of silly if you don't have a business with a name. And that has a bunch of URLs that we can click on. Oh, here it is, average rating. Ooh, that's a really good one. For 477 reviews, average rating is 5. They're doing pretty well. Okay. All right, so we have this. So we have this list of businesses, right? Businesses. Let's call this businesses nearby. So we have this list of businesses. If we want to iterate over this list of businesses, that should ring a bell. If we want to iterate over this list of businesses, we have access to use a directive to do that. Does anyone remember what that directive is called? Oh, you all remember. Awesome. Cool. So the way ngRepeat works, if we remember, oh, sorry. I should type that out manually, shouldn't I? The way ngRepeat works is it is going to repeat, it's going to create a copy of an element for every single item in that list. So we're going to do, I'm going to call it biz in businesses. It's like this. And then for every single one of these, we will print out the name. We're just going to say there's a bunch of businesses, and we're just going to look at the names. Do this. All right. So I have the HTML up over here. So we come back here and refresh the page. We have businesses nearby, despite the fact that this is showing what's your name again? Blue? Naveen? Yes. Do you know how we could get rid of this? Do you remember how we can do that? Yeah. For the time being, we'll leave it in there, just for now. But, shoot, of course, we'll just put that in there. ng-show equals nearby. So if we refresh the page, hooray, it's gone. Okay, so if we click go, we should see, oh, I think I called this nearby. There we go. Hooray, now we have all of our businesses by their names listed in this nice little array, nice little list. It's not really that interesting just showing a bunch of businesses. It will get more interesting now. I promise. Okay, so, so we have this list. So we have this list of business names. We probably want to provide a URL for people to click on, right? So we can do that by surrounding this whole thing in an A tag. And we'll pass in biz dot, what was it? I think URL, like that. And we'll say this is a clickable business name. So the astute observer might say, well, when this page loads, we're going to have a link. We're going to have a link that doesn't actually resolve until that business comes back. This is generally OK for links, but it's good practice to, when you're using a link that needs to be resolved, to wrap that in the nghref directive, which the nghref directive will resolve that link when the data comes back in. And then we also have the business has average rating. And I think let's do this, biz JSON. Whoop, typo. Where did I mistyped something. Nope, that's not it. Oh, haha. Okay. Okay. So all we're doing in every single list item is we're just iterating over each list item. We are saying that we're passing in the name, and that name is a clickable name. And then we're also passing in the average rating, and that is an average rating right here. Oh, and then I also added this JSON here so that we could look at a couple other things inside of here. Let's go there. Okay, so Yelp, one of the nice things that Yelp does is it passes back there's a bunch of images that we can show on the screen, and they make it look just a little bit nicer. So we're going to pass in a couple more things inside of here. We're going to use an image, and this image what we'll do is this will show the average rating image URL. You'll see what that looks like shortly. The one thing is that if we load this like this, the browser is going to see this image tag and it's going to try to render this source. If we do that, we'll refresh the page. It's going to say, hey, I can't get this source. I can't show this image because it's trying to load the image URL with those curly brackets. The way we can get around that is by doing the same thing that we did with the A ref, is we can say ng source, just like that. Let's go ahead and refresh the page. You'll see that we don't see that error anymore. And the nice image that shows up now is that average rating image. OK, and the last thing that we want to do is just show a photo, and that photo, we'll do the exact same thing that we did before, biz.photo URL. OK. I know I went a little bit fast on that. I just wanted to get us to the point where we have the HTML there, so you guys can type that in, and we can start doing filtering.
Can you explain the ng source one more time?
Right. So when Angular loads, when the page loads, the browser is going to see a source tag, and it's going to try to render whatever that source tag is, right? And because we're passing in bracket bracket biz.photo URL, the browser is going to say, oh, I need to go get an image called bracket bracket photo URL. But there's obviously not going to be something there. So a way that we can get around that is by using Angular's directive, which is simply a function that runs on the image element. When that data does populate, then it's going to say, oh, cool, I need to go parse whatever is inside biz.photo URL and add that as a source on this element.
Okay, so the image source are just blank until the data comes
Yep.
and then it does image source. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Can someone look up, is there a number of ratings in the Yelp? Can someone tell me if there's like a number, ratings count?
Review count.
Is it called ratings underscore count?
Review underscore count.
Review underscore count. Cool. So let's also add that in here too. What was it called? Ratings.
Review underscore count.
Thank you. Just like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question that I already know the answer. Are we all here yet? Okay, so the important ones that are here are the rating and the rating count and the name. So if you don't have the photo URL, that's okay. If you don't have the ratings image URL, that's okay too. All right, I will magnify this guy. Okay, so the ng repeat tag is on this li tag. We're iterating over a list of businesses. We're adding a link tag to the A using ng href. We're putting the business name on there. We're putting the photo, and then average ratings and review count. Got it? Yeah. If you're not here, if you don't at least have the name and the rating or review count, raise your hand. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so now we're gonna, Nate, do you want to help for Nat? What was your name again? I totally forgot. Ray? Okay. Okay, so this is all well and good, right? This is kind of fun. We have these lists of names, but what if our users want to look at these list of, hold on one sec. So what if we want our users to be able to, there we go. Now our h1 tag works. What if we want our users to be able to sort these names, right? That would be kind of fun. So we've already seen an example of filters when I passed in the pipe and then JSON. That's a filter. What filters are specifically designed to do is to limit and present and craft what we are giving in a presentable kind of way, in a presentable way for the view. So we can use that. As I said, they're specifically designed for the view. So we can use these filters to filter over and iterate over our our collection. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Collection. Iteratable object. That's what I meant to say. So for instance, let's say that we want to allow our users to iterate over or to resort our businesses using a name. Oh, right. You're excused. So what we can do is we can set, oh, whoops. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. So what we can do is we can set a filter on here, and we're going to use a filter called the order by filter. And this order by filter will sort our collection based on a term that we give it. So for instance, let's say that we want to order by the name. We can do this. Inside of our ng repeat, we're ordering by the quote name. So if we come here and refresh the page, when our businesses populate, we'll see that it's ordered by name. Unless, of course, I mistyped. Nope, there we go. Cool, so we have a bunch of B, C, D, E, G, L. It's ordered by name, right? So what if we want to inverse that or reverse that, invert it? The order by filter right here, we're passing in its, as a first argument, we're passing a string, and that string is name. It also takes a second argument. Oh, by the way that you pass in arguments to filters is by using the colon, and then you pass in the argument. It can also take a second argument, and the order by itself, the second argument is if you want to inverse or reverse that string. So if we pass in true, refresh the page, this is going to be in alphabetical descending order. So we can see that T, S, R, M, it's in reverse order. Okay, that's kind of cool. The exception of that's static, right? It's still static. We want our users to be able to limit and reverse this. So knowing what you know about Angular, how can we do that? Any volunteers? Knowing what you know about Angular now, right now we've hard-coded name and true inside of here. Knowing what you know about Angular, we could bind it to a value of a checkbox. Checkboxes imply that you have multiple filters. So instead of that, let's bind it to a button. But yes, that's exactly what we'll do. So what we can do is we'll create a button, and we'll have that we'll have that button say we want to sort by, let's say, the name. And how do we change the, what do we do when this button is clicked? We want to change something. So how do we do that? What directive do we use? The ng-click. What we're going to do is we're going to set, I don't know, let's say we'll set a predicate, and we'll set that predicate equal to name, the string name. Let's also do that. Okay, for completeness sake, let's also set it so that we have it's sorting by average rating. And number of ratings. Okay, so now we'll have 3 buttons, and each one of those buttons does something distinctly different. We're not quite ordering yet. Can anyone tell me why? Yep. Okay, so remember this itself is an Angular X. It's an Angular expression, and Angular expressions have access to the local scope. So we don't have to do anything special. We can just simply pass in predicate, just like that. Let's add one more button real quick, and this button will just resort. We'll make this a caret, just like that. And this will simply just change the review from, change the reverse to the inverse of whatever is in reverse, just like that. So now rather than hard coding true, we can just pass in reverse. I can.
Is there any, do you have to, or?
No, I like giving them classes because it makes it look a little nicer, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And let's make this plus minus just like that. Okay. If we wanted to, we could change the content of this button, but we could change this so that if it is already reversed, we can show the plus, and if it's not reversed, if it's in order, then we can show the minus. We'll just be lazy for the time being, but you could if you wanted to. In fact, it's a good exercise. Okay, so if we come back here and we reload the view, we do our search for San Francisco, California. We'll have a bunch of buttons at the top right there, as you can see. And if we click on one of these buttons, we'll see that now we get, our list reorders. And if we want to do it in reverse, oh, I guess they're all rated 5. Well, that's unfortunate. If we want to do it in reverse, then we can simply click on plus and minus, just like that. If we want to do it based on review count, oh, wow, this got 80, still 5. Now we have, the top one has 477 reviews. Holy cow, that's cool. We didn't really do any JavaScript when we wrote this, did we? No. We didn't write any JavaScript, and now it's already live filtering. Let's go one step further. Let's allow our users to do a search, to do a live search in our view. In order to do that, what we'll do is we'll add another input field. And we will bind the value of this input field to a special object. And that special object we'll just call this object search. I say it's a special object. It's not really a special object. You'll see why shortly. And let's say that we just want to allow our users to do a holder. Let's say that we just want to allow our users to filter based on the name of the business. So the way we'll do that is we'll pass in an object. We'll bind it to an object called search. And we're going to bind it to a property of that search object called name. So in order to have live search actually working, we have to filter our ng repeat. We have to filter that list. To filter that list, we'll add another filter. And we'll do this before our sorting filter. We're going to use a filter called the filter filter. I know, it's a mouthful. And our filter, we're going to pass the search object. So if we come back over here and refresh the page, we'll go back to the HTML in just one sec. We now have this nice little search box. So if we, inside of our search box, we start typing, we can limit what comes back. We can limit what's shown on the page. So for instance, here I have, I'm typing Bay Area. You can see that the only fields inside of our Bay Area, or the only businesses that are shown are the businesses that have Bay Area in the name. Ooh, ah. And then we can still sort. We can sort by the number of reviews. We can sort by their name. Nifty, right? And if we go here and we delete that, we'll see that all of our businesses are back. Okay, so what we did was actually really incredible. I don't know if you caught it or not, but we implemented live search in like 20 characters of code, HTML markup. That's pretty cool.
Just go back to the HTML.
I totally can.
Where you were giving search
Right. So the reason is because the filter is taking search as an object, and it's going to compare the keys to every single other object, to all the object, and it's going to say, does this object match the other object? So right now, we're only searching based on that name. If we want to allow the user to search on anything inside of there, let's say we want review data inside of there, if review data comes back from Yelp, then instead of passing .name, we can pass $. And what this will do is this will say, okay, Angular, compare to every field inside of Angular, inside of the object.
Is that $, the universal placeholder for?
Yes, it's an Angular idiom. It's the filters idiom.
I've been typing without seeing what you wrote, and I wrote filter column search.name, and it also search in all fields. So if you pass just string or an element, it would search through all properties of the piece.
If you pass in the $, yes.
No, I didn't. I had search.name and also filter column search.name.
Oh, you have search.name. Yeah, you can't, if you want it to search, if you want to limit, so what you're doing is you're passing, okay. So the way that the filter works is if this is an object, it's going to compare it, and your list are a bunch of objects, which they should be, it's going to compare to that object. If you're passing in just a simple string, then it's going to compare to every single value inside that object. What is search? What? Oh, right. So if you do search.name, what it's doing is it's saying, okay, here's an example object. This example object has search.name, or it's a search object, and it has a name property. And it's going to go through every other object and say, what keys does my example search object have? Oh, it has name, and it's going to compare the name to every other object in that list's name. If you want to do a search on every single thing, then you can pass $. Make sense?
Where do we get documentation of such API of Angular?
I know a book, or you can go to docs.angularjs.org.
Or go to?
A book.
No, sorry, I didn't get the second.
Oh, docs.angularjs.org. Or you can look at the source.
Can you scroll up just a little bit on HTML?
Totally.
So the predicate is just whatever the value is in the LIs for the buttons. We have the
Yes.
like predicate.
Yep. Okay, cool. We've done some live search. Hooray. That was fun, right? I see some nodding heads. That makes me feel happy. Oh, there's only one express. How about dog? Puppy? No. All right. I like puppies. Can I say? Okay. All right, moving on to the slides, because now we have under 2 hours and we still have a lot to get through. So, controllers themselves are temporary objects. They only hang around for as long as Angular needs them. Angular will destroy a controller if it's no longer referenced in the view. This is important because when we start getting to multiple views, those controllers will go away. So what that also means is we can't store data that we want to keep around in the lifecycle of our application on a scope object and expect that data to still be there when we come back to it. For instance, if a user logs in, we want to hold on to that user's token or that user's username and password, although it's probably a bad idea to keep that in the client side, so you'd probably want to keep the token. We don't want the user, every single time they switch a view, to have to re-log in, because that'd just be silly and very bad UI, and your users would probably never use your web app if you had to do that. So we can't store that data on a scope. How do we store that data then, you might say? I don't know. You might say, how do we store that data? I don't know why I still am asking those questions. Well, we'll use a service. So a service is a singleton object that lasts for the entire duration of the application. It's also a good place to store, excuse me, jet lag. It's also a good place to store like data and like methods. For instance, anytime we want to interact with our backend and we want to use a user service, for example, it's a good idea to keep all like methods like log user in and log user out and what's my user's name in a user service, because it makes sense that you'd call get my username from a user service. It doesn't make sense you'd call get weather from a user service. But if you had a weather service, then it would make sense. Awesome. There's a bunch, Angular comes in with a bunch of built-in services. We've looked at a couple, the HTTP, the queue service, which you didn't really look at, has a log service, which is really nice because it allows us to log in development and not log in production, type of stuff like that. Excuse me. Intervals, timeouts, there's a bunch of them. And what's really cool, what's really great is we can create our own service. There's a couple different options to create a service. Today we're only going to use one. The one way that we're going to create a service is by using the .service method. Oh, what was that? Can you repeat that? Yeah, using the service method. What was your name again? Paul. Paul. We have not talked yet. But you've definitely nodded your head a bunch, so it made me feel like I knew you. Okay. Okay, so we've done kind of the universal no-no in our example. We have used the $HTTP inside of our controller. I'll explain why that's a universal no-no shortly. For the time being, trust me, it's a universal no-no. So instead of having our HTTP inside of our controller, we'll create a service that will house get weather from for our controller to call. What's going on here? Okay. All right, so Paul, we're going to create a service. And it's going to house our weather data. What should we call this service?
Weather service?
Yeah, we'll call it the weather service. So the service method takes 2 arguments, and I bet you already know what they are. The first one is the name.
Name and then a function.
Yep, and this function is the constructor function for the service. So anytime when Angular says, oh, we need our weather service, it's going to call this function. And it's only going to call this function once and only once for the whole duration of the lifecycle because it's a singleton object. If you're not familiar with the term singleton, basically it means we'll only create one of these and we'll never create another. We'll create it once and we'll never recreate it. It will always be around. That's what singleton means-ish. Okay, so the way that we define methods on our service is we're going to use the this inside that constructor function, the this object. So we have a function that gets weather. So inside of our weather service, rather than do that, we're going to create a function. We're going to create this function. Oop, I totally just spit on my screen. You guys didn't see that. Also, I probably should have said that, and then you wouldn't have no idea. Right. So we're going to create a function called getWeather4 with the intention of we're going to pass it a city like that. And now what we can do for this service to define this function is we can come down here to our scope.getWeatherData, take out the entire method of getWeatherData, also known as cutting. We can cut that entire thing out and paste that into the service method. In order for this to work, for one thing, there is no scope associated with the service. Scope is only associated with the controller. So it will not work the way that it works right now, or the way that we have it set up. And there's 3 things we have to do in order to get this to work. 1, we don't have access to the $HTTP. So guy sitting next to Paul, what was your, Paul? You were Paul, yes. What was your name? Brad. Very definitive, Brad. It's Brad. We had like a period at the end of that. Awesome. So how do we get access to the $HTTP service inside of this service? And I'll give you a hint. It starts with D. Yes.
What was it? Someone.
Tell Brad. Tell Brad.
Dependency injection.
Dependency injection.
Yes, so we have to tell Brad.
Inject.
We have to inject the $HTTP service. The way that we do that inside of a
Add another parameter into
yes, into the
service.
yes, totally right. I didn't have to say anything. So that parameter will be called $HTTP. Now we officially have access to that inside of our service. Second thing we'll have to do is $HTTP returns a promise. And because we are defining a method on a service, we want to return a promise from that method. So we have to put return here. So now we're going to get the result of that promise being passed back from getWeather4. The second and a half thing that we have to do is we no longer have scope in here, so we have to remove scope entirely from our function. So we have this in 3 spots. We have it here. We have it here. And we have it here. We're going to take that out too. OK. So
Can't we inject it like we did for the controller?
yes, but it will throw you a giant error because there's no scope associated with the service. If there was a scope associated with the service, all bunch of hairy things would happen because a service lasts for the entire duration of the app. If you create a service for it, or if you create a scope for it, then when you switch to another page or Angular says, hey, I don't need this controller anymore, then you're going to be bound to a scope that no longer exists. By the way, it's really good that Angular cleans up after itself because for memory management and garbage collection purposes, it keeps your app performant. So what we can do instead is we're going to set up a promise chain. This is where promise chains get really fun. So what we are doing in this getWeather4 is we're passing back a promise. We don't actually want that promise to come back when we call this, because then inside of our promise that returns inside of our controller, we're going to have to call .data.data. We don't have to do that. Instead, we can simply set up a promise chain to respond with data.data. Make sense?
Not yet.
It will shortly, promise. For the time being, just for this moment, we're going to not deal with catch. You'll see why in just a minute. OK. Oh, I totally forgot, we have to grab this weather URL.
I missed something. What's the advantage of having .service as opposed to a function?
We haven't said it quite yet. I'll show you in a minute. OK. So now we have a service called weather service. But we still need to get our weather inside of our controller. The first thing that we need to do inside of our controller is we need to get access to that weather service. How do we do that? Brad?
Sorry.
How do we get access to our weather service inside of our controller?
Is this dependency injection again?
Yep, so we have to
Inject, so we need to add another variable, yeah.
just like that. OK. So we're going to take our weather service. And now in getWeatherData, instead of actually making the HTTP call inside of there, we're going to say weather service dot get weather for scope.city. OK, and we're almost done with it, I promise. All right. So remember I said that we are setting up a promise chain. What's going on with this when we set up our promise chain is we are saying, okay, weather service get weather. The weather service get weather for is going to return a promise. When that promise comes back and gets resolved, we have set up a then method to handle that promise inside of the get weather for method in the weather service. So rather than the data from HTTP getting passed back, we're mucking with the data, aka we're just passing data.data back from that raw HTTP request. So we no longer have to call data.data. We can just say our weather service is handling that for us. Make sense? This is way more elegant than having HTTP inside of there. If we come back here and refresh our page, should still work theoretically, unless, of course, I made a giant error. Oh, there it is. Except for weather didn't come back. Let's go see. Oh, yeah, it did. That was just the internet. They're very bad internet. Okay. Did everyone get that? I can. Pretty much all we did, just to recap, is we copied and pasted the method that we wrote in our controller, and we moved it to a service, and we removed all scope references. We returned the promise that comes back from HTTP, and then we set up our promise chain by returning data inside of the .then method. If you didn't set this up, by the way, if you don't set this up, this is going to return the HTTP response. And if you return back the HTTP response inside of a controller, we have to call weather.data, or data.data. This way, we can just depend on that coming back as weather.
So why do we return both in the then and the response of these?
Why do we return this and this? Right. So what we're doing here is we're passing back a promise. Okay. Let's real quick.
So that returns right away.
So this promise returns first. So if we did that, we could simply do this, right? So this is assuming, or this is saying when the users of the weather service have to know that we're passing back data.data.
And it might come back before the then runs too.
No.
No?
No.
Because we're in a then right now, okay.
Yes. So this is semi-poor implementation. The reason it's poor implementation is because the user of the weather service needs to know that you're making an HTTP HTTP request and you're getting back the HTTP request. Alternatively, when you're using the weather service, a user of the weather service might be like, well, why do I have to call .data on this thing? So it makes more sense to set up, in this case, a promise chain. And this promise chain allows us to hide the implementation from the user of the weather service to say, when you call get weather for, you're just going to get the weather. The way this works is Angular is saying, if I had a whiteboard, I would totally draw this. Ooh, I have a non-erasable whiteboard. Do we have a pen for that non-erasable whiteboard? Okay, so the way that this works, not super low level, but the way that this, from a high level perspective, is my typing is more legible than my writing. the way this works is we have our controller. Our controller says, hey, get weather for city, right?
Yeah.
If we just pass in, if we don't set up a promise chain, this is going to say, okay, I'm going to return that promise to you immediately when this comes back. Setting up a promise chain, instead of that, what we can do, let's say this is the promise. If we set up a promise chain, we can call .then on that before we pass it back. And what that does is it sets up another promise. This is why it's called a promise chain. Is it sets up another promise and says, okay, I'm going to return this promise to you and set up a chain so that when set up a chain, I just used that word twice in the same sentence, I'm sorry. It will set up a path of execution such that when we return this, when that gets returned, we're going to call this promise first, and then we're going to return the data from that promise to the controller. Does that make sense? So rather than passing this guy directly, we're passing a modified version of that data, which is what's happening here. This is how you do that. The catch, yes. So this catch function will run. Since we don't have anything inside of here, it's going to return undefined if there's no error, or if there is an error. We're never going to see that. Let's go handle that now. All right. So if we want, we can now, because we're using catch inside of here, we can handle this a couple different ways. We can pass back something that has like error, and we can just pass the error back like that. Although I think that's kind of hacky. The reason I think that's hacky is because when we use this, we have to test. We have to say if weather.error else, right? And that's kind of hacky. I personally like to use the promise syntax regardless of where I'm at. In order for us to use the promise syntax, in order for us to be able to be like, okay, so we can call catch here. I'll tell you in one sec. In order to be able to do this, let me one line of thought real quick. In order for us to be able to do this, we have to, instead of returning this data directly, we have to return a rejection to that promise. The way that we do that is by passing back a q. Whoops, let's keep that in there. A q.reject. Just like that. So what this is doing is this is creating a new rejection, and we're continuing that rejection along the promise chain. If we don't do this, bad things could happen. That's not true. If we don't do this, then we're just passing back real data, or we're just passing back raw data, which means we have to handle it in the .then, which could be good if you want to do that, but I particularly like the promise chain. So the question was, why do I do it like this? Why does the syntax like that? IE8 itself considers catch to be a keyword, like a JavaScript keyword. So if you're running this in IE8, IE8's going to be like, whoa, stop that. So I put it as a string like that. It's the same thing.
Could you write this dot
Catch? Yep. You can.
Then it's just not.
Just won't run in IE8.
Compatible.
Yep. Same thing.
Should you do like .cats for top too? Just
Yeah.
brackets.
Yeah, you could do it. They're the same thing. If you JavaScript objects, right? Sorry to get away from this real quick, but JavaScript objects are the same. Like if we have an object with a, and that's equal to 1, we can call object.a like that, or we can call object.a, right? It's the same thing. It's just a raw JavaScript object. Okay, so you might be saying, before we go do the same thing with Yelp, you might be saying, well, why the hell will we do this? We've already had this implemented with the controller. The reason is because testing with HTTP, $HTTP inside of a controller is terrible. It sucks. It's really hard. And you have to mock everything. And it's really bad. And I promise you'll want to hang yourself if you do it.
Separation of concerns, basically.
Yes. The other thing, it's a separation of concerns. And, thank you, by the way. The other thing is that if we want to call getWeather anywhere else in our application, we have to copy and paste that code into a new controller. And if you're copying and pasting code, you're doing something wrong, because then you have to implement it twice. Every controller that wants to call the weather has to know how to call the weather. Whereas if you have a service, it only has to know how to call that service. This is really good for things like login when you have multiple places on your app where you're like, oh, I want the user to be able to log in both the header and the login page, for instance. Just looked at a promise chain. Huzzah. OK. Before we jump into routing, let's real quick take that Yelp data. Who have I not spoken to yet? Guy in the back, all the way to the center. Yeah. What's your name? You. What's your name? Yeah. Oscar. Cool. Do you want to create the Yelp service with me real quick? All right. So how do we create the Yelp service?
So you service and the name would be Yelp service.
OK.
And the same function passing $HTTP.
Yep.
And then basically copy over and queue to where to go to.
Yep. Sorry, I totally just jumped the. Get out of here. That's my baby brother. He's getting married. It's cute. OK. So we'll call this get nearby. We have to return this. What else do we have to do inside of here, Oscar?
We have to return the. We have to change the scope anytime we see scope.
Yep.
We have to return the data.
We also need to pass in a city. And then the last thing we need to do is grab this. OK, for one thing, our controller looks a lot nicer, right? Am I right? Can I get an am I right? Yeah, thanks. Cool, so then we'll, oh, this isn't going to work. Why isn't this going to work? Yeah. Yes. Give me 1 sec. And then I'm also going to take out $HTTP. Hooray, we don't have HTTP in our controller anymore. Huzzah, life is good. Yes.
When do we return data directly from the service as opposed to actually instantiating the deferred object and using the queue resolve and returning deferred promise?
Right. So let me try to rephrase the question real quick. The question is, why aren't we saying queue.resolve here? Is that right?
Right, and then return the promise.
Right. So we are actually returning a promise. We are already returning a promise. That promise is getting resolved into the then function in our promise chain. So we don't have to say queue resolve, because it's already getting resolved into our then. So the promise chain itself already handles that resolution. If you're doing something like that, like with a timeout, for instance, or you're calling like a Google library, since Angular doesn't know about your, or Facebook, like the Facebook API, since Google doesn't know about that Facebook API, when the Facebook API returns, we have to, if we want to continue using promises, which I highly insist you do, then you have to create a promise that you resolve on your own. But because it's already inside of a promise that we're already returning, we don't need to do that. Okay. Does everyone have a couple services? All right, I'm going to wait like 3 minutes.
Could you
Yes.
look that up on like JSO or something? I've got a missing semicolon somewhere. I can't find it.
Where are my buttons? Not my gumdrop buttons. Oh, there. Oh. Okay, so it's j.mp. Sure. That's my code as it currently stands right now. So if you're not caught up to where we are, just go grab that code. So I have a deal to make with you guys. We have an hour and 15 minutes left. I can definitely feel that we're getting a little restless. Can we stick with it for another hour and 15 minutes so we can get to testing? If not, we can take a break. If you need to take a break, totally just get up and throw a table over and walk out, and then come back in and pick up the table. But if you can wait, it'd be a little easier. Because tables make messes. What? Okay. All right. Everyone have this URL? I'm deleting it. Okay. Okay. So does everyone feel good about the controller? Does everyone feel good about services?
Can you put also the HTML, please?
Yes. It will be on that same link. Okay, there you go.
Can you put the link back up just for 1 second?
It is Ari-app.js. j.mp Ari-app. Okay. When we're done with this, I will put that code up there too. I'll put our final code, if I remember. You may have to remind me. Okay.